New Testament survey, first class, and general introduction on page 2. Everybody turn there, and I'm just going to synopsize it. This book, New Testament Survey, has been written as a companion volume to my Old Testament survey. The two have been put together to meet a need that I have experienced in my own ministry and even in my own Christian life in general. I had studied the scriptures for some 18 years. That was when I wrote this back in 2005. But I had never had a comprehensive look at the scriptures as an organic whole. Romans had been studied, as had Matthew, the Revelation, all the rest of the books of the New Testament, Genesis, Malachi, so on and so forth of the Old Testament. However, something was lacking. It took some years, but I finally realized what it was. I had, so to speak, studied the hand and the foot, the head and the legs, and even how they interlocked and interacted with other portions of the body. What I had not done, however, was to apprehend the body as a whole. So in my studies, I studied the books separately. This is an overview. Originally, this was written for our Sunday school here as a one-year overview of the Bible. In fact, it's online as Old Testament, New Testament survey. I wrote it for our Sunday school, but then I realized, hey, break it in 2 parts and we'll teach it in the college. So that's what we did. We taught the Old Testament survey last semester. This semester will be New Testament survey. And what it is it's going to give you a skeleton framework of the New Testament, so that as you study the different books, you'll know how they fit in to the body as a whole. In fact, Brother Ayers, down in Fillmore, he and I were talking when I first decided I was going to write this. This is what he said. He said, I had that same textbook in college. It's actually a paperback about that thick, probably, 500-600 pages. And it's manuscript MPS 36-4 says this, but manuscript PS 32 says that. You know how much of that I've used in the ministry? And I've been in the ministry now since 1985. Zero. I've used none of it. And Brother Ayers said, I had that same textbook in college. He then went on to say, I got so frustrated trying to understand it that I threw it across the room. It was just, it would be wonderful if you were going to go into manuscript comparison. If that was going to be what you want to be in life, as someone that compares the different manuscripts, that would have been a wonderful book. In the regular ministry, Sunday school teacher, pastor, whatever it might be, really, it's nothing you're going to use. It was totally worthless to me, and to Brother Ayers also. And so that's why this was written. This is a skeleton framework, because I don't care what MP36 or my favorite guy, one of those is the Pew 38 space modulator in the cartoons. I don't care what they say. I really don't. We use the King James Bible. I study the manuscripts the King James Bible is taken from, and that's all I need to know about that particular subject, because that's not my specialty. I'm not specializing in understanding the manuscripts. So this is an overview of the entire New Testament. And then the other one was an overview of the Old Testament. Okay, next page. We decided then, since I'm the administrative vice president, now I'm the president of the college, we decided to just break it into 2 parts, Old Testament, New Testament survey, and study that as a, there you go, and use them as college classes.
Okay.
There you go. Use them as college classes. So turn to page 4. That was the reason it was written, very briefly.
New Testament,
Yeah, New Testament survey, we're on page 4. Intertestamental period, the time of silence, between the close of Malachi and when, and by the way, the first book that was written of the New Testament, they assume was Mark, not Matthew and then Mark. Matthew, it was put in that order for like continuity, for understanding, and because it gave the genealogy of Christ. But actually, Mark was probably the first book, if not Luke, of the New Testament written. So during the time of the close of the Old Testament and the opening of the New Testament, there was a time that's called the intertestamental period. It's between the Old and the New Testament. The intertestamental period began with the completion of the Old Testament. From the time of the prophecy of Elijah to come, in the closing chapter of the book of Malachi, which is Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6, until the announcement by the angel of the impending birth of John the Baptist to his father, the priest named Zacharias, in Luke 1, 11 through 20, there ensued a period of some 400 years in which there was no word of communication from God to man. This period has been called the 400 years of silence. During this period, many remarkable changes occurred in the world that shaped the future history of the nation of Israel and prepared the way for Jesus Christ, Messiah, also called the Son of God as well as the Son of Man. And so, during that period, there are apocryphal books. The Catholic Bible has the Apocrypha in it, but there were also other books written that are called Pseudo-Logomena. And I may not even be pronouncing that right. My dad used to call those 8-cylinder words. Pseudo meaning imitation or false. So there were Logomena, from the logos word, false word. There were a lot of books written during that period of 400 years. None of them are scripture. Some of them are beneficial, such as the Maccabees, the book of First and Second Maccabees. Those are beneficial as history, but that doesn't make them the Bible. That'd be like taking our songbook. Hey, it's got a lot of good stuff in that songbook, but that doesn't make it scripture. The same way with First and Second Maccabees. You could possibly want to get a copy of those and just read them for the historical matter. But don't ever consider them as scripture, because they're not. History before and during the intertestamental period. Assyria and Babylon, Roman numeral 1. 722 to 539 BC. In 722 BC, Assyria had conquered the northern kingdom, Israel, but the kingdom of Judah remained an independent kingdom until the entrance of Babylonian influence in Palestine. In 605 BC, right after the fall of Egypt to Babylon at the Second Battle of Carchemish, Judah became a part of the Babylonian Empire. The first deportation occurred in 605 BC, including the prophet Daniel. Remember, he was part of those that were deported from Israel. Back during the wars at that time, and even before that time, it was very common, if you conquered a country, you would take most of their people and move them to another country, a conquered country, and take most of those people from that conquered country and move them back over where that first country, and they would take over the country, and they would be the citizens there. That's what happened with Israel. Daniel and the rest of them from Judah, they were taken captive and moved to Babylon, and then people from other parts of the Babylonian Empire were then moved into Israel and into Judah and so on and so forth. And those were the people then that were there when the return of Israel, when they came back, those people were still there in that general area.
Were they sent there because to secure more territory for Babylon?
Well, you conquered Israel and you conquered Media, or something, okay? If you conquer these people and leave them at home, they're going to fight pretty hard to get their country back, okay? But if you take them and move them over here, well, what good would it do them to fight over here?
Yeah.
That's not their country. And then you would take the Medes or whatever, and you would move them into Israel, and they're probably not going to fight very hard either because it's not their country. So that's just part of the reason. It was mostly psychological. If you read in the Psalms, it says when they were deported from Israel, the musicians hung their harps on a tree, and they couldn't even sing anymore. They'd even lost their song. So you could tell it was really hard on them mentally. And that was part of the reason they would switch the populations. Excuse me. And much of the temple treasures were confiscated under King Nebuchadnezzar. Excuse me. This air is really pretty nasty today. Making my eyes water and my nose run. Capital B. Several Judean rebellions occurred under King Jehoiakim and his son Jehoiachin, and as a consequence, in 597 BC, after a short three-month reign of the son, the second major deportation of Jews took place. At that time, the remainder of the temple treasures were removed. Also at this time, the young priest Ezekiel was carried away into captivity. You got to realize many times when the princes and the priests were deported from their country to another one, they were usually made eunuchs. That was a very common practice. They were castrated. And that way, that line, they couldn't say, well, the priestly line continues. Not when you're a eunuch. It's not going to continue. So that was very common. Same way with the kings, you know. The prince would then become king, and then his son would become king after him. But once you make him a eunuch, there's not going to be any more children come out of that line. And so they would do it for many reasons, but that was one of the main ones.
Would they allow a eunuch to be a king?
Would they allow a eunuch to be a king?
Yeah,
They might. They might. But the thing is, he couldn't pass it on to his children. But we're talking about people that were king when they were conquered and taken away. The country would, as far as I can remember, has never put them back into their own country as a king. And so Ezekiel was carried away into captivity. Capital C, Nebuchadnezzar then appointed Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, to the throne and changed his name to Zedekiah. Against the advice of the prophet Jeremiah, Zedekiah also tried another revolt with Egypt as allies. Egypt failed to support Judah in this effort, and a long and catastrophic siege of Jerusalem began, which ended with the slaughter of Zedekiah's sons and his being blinded and carried off to Babylon. At this time, 586 BC, the third major removal of the people took place. In addition, the tragedy of tragedies took place for the Jewish people when Solomon's temple was burned down. And to add insult to supreme injury, the walls of the city were also burned down. This ended the nation of Judah, Israel, after some 500 years of existence, beginning with Saul and culminating with the establishment of the throne of David, which had continued until this time and ended with Zedekiah. D, the 70 years of exile, 605 to 535 BC. During this time, we see the rise of synagogues as places of worship. Remember, the temple's destroyed. Not only that, these people are no longer in Israel. They're over in these various countries. And so therefore they started the synagogues, and that was during this time period, during the 70 years of exile. We see the rise of synagogues as places of worship. Never meant to be a replacement for the temple, these were simply utilized as places of worship of Jehovah, as well as places of study of the scriptures, and, of course, places of Jewish fellowship. These places later became centers for the preaching of the gospel by the apostles upon the establishment of the Christian church by Christ, which in reality was a Jewish messianic church some 600 years later. Remember, most of the New Testament churches were Jewish.
yes.
They were messianic Jews. They were Jews that realized Messiah, Meshach, had come.
First Christians.
All of the first Christians were Jews.
Yeah.
In fact, all of the writers of the New Testament are Jews,
Yeah.
with the exception of Luke, who is a Gentile.
He was half.
But in the last 15 or 20 years, history has been, they're still doing historical searches in that and trying to figure out where the different apostles came from. That maybe Luke may have also had a Jewish mother,
Yeah,
but we don't know for sure.
I heard that he was half Jew.
Yeah, so historically they think he maybe was half Jew, which meant the whole New Testament was written by Jews. Okay, so also during this exile, we see the rise of the group known as the scribes, which were priests who no longer could fulfill their appointed ministry, so they turned their attention to the copying and studying of Old Testament scriptures. Soon, because of this, they became the learned theologians of Judaism. Remember that, I don't know if any of these pens will work.
Here.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a minute, I got
To bring you some, Doc.
I gotta open.
Remember when they copied the scriptures,
Where did I find them?
if they made one mistake, they threw the whole page away.
Where'd it go?
They were not allowed to erase anything.
I got
No,
it.
okay.
So, you got one there?
Yeah, I do, I just have to find
In
it.
England, when they were doing the King James,
Mm-hmm.
they studied for hours, and
Thank you.
Yeah.
they didn't have a word for baptism, did they?
There was no English word for baptism. It's a transliteration of the Greek,
Yeah.
baptismos.
Oh,
Actually, the Spanish is closer to the Greek than the English is.
yeah.
And so they would, well, of course, they were right to left. They'd write a whole line of their letters, and when they got down here, there'd be their equivalent of
I got
numbers.
more pens. If they don't want
Okay.
it, throw it away.
And what they would do is, like, there'd be 4 of this letter.
Uh-huh.
And then there would be, 6 of this other letter, and 9 of the other, and 7 of the other, and if any of them was missing, they'd throw the whole page away. Because they might be all the way down here to the end of the page, and there'd be 1 letter missing. They weren't allowed, or maybe 1 wrong letter, they weren't allowed to erase it, and you couldn't put a letter in the middle, so they'd throw the whole page away. That's how serious they were. And this was holy. Even the scrap pages were holy, and that's where Tischendorf found the Sinaiticus at the monastery of St. Catherine at the foot of Mount Sinai. Actually, we think it's Sinai, it's Mesel Juba.
Catholic stuff.
Yeah, and so Tischendorf was at the monastery of St. Catherine, and here, I'll give this back so I don't forget.
Okay.
And they heated the monastery with a big furnace. And he went down in the basement, and he saw a bunch of these guys in this room over here, and they take big shovels full of parchment, which burns real well. And they were throwing it in the furnace. He said, "What are you doing?" They said, "Oh, that's just scrap." Well, that was probably scraps like this, okay? Because they wouldn't destroy them. They would put them in there because they were holy, because they had God's word. They looked at the word of God like the Muslim looks at the Quran. A Muslim believes the Quran, when he's reading it, is the very voice of God speaking to him. And that's what they believe. If it's in Arabic, if it's translated to any other language, it's just a translation. But a Muslim believes that when they're reading the Quran in Arabic, that's the very voice of God speaking to them. Man, I wish people would look at our Bible that way. I really do. I wish they would look at it like, man, this is God speaking to me. The only difference is it's written instead of here, but it's still to be received as God's very voice speaking to us. So the Muslims, in many ways, are a lot holier than we are. They just have to be holy to a different
The
God.
devil.
Yeah. So,
But the Bible's still the bestseller, and yet it's probably the least read.
yeah. And so they were shoveling this stuff in there, and he said, "What's that?" And it's all a bunch of old parchments and stuff. And he went in and started collecting them, and that's where the Sinaiticus came from, was from a garbage bin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's where he got all of the parchments. And because the Jews wouldn't they wouldn't destroy it, it was too holy. It was the word of God. It was God's voice. And so they would put them in a separate room. Note, and I'm still under D. Idolatry, the prime cause of the captivity, soon came to an end among those in that captivity. Divine judgment brought about this fruit of repentance, which has lasted now for 2.5 millennia among Orthodox Jews. They were taken into captivity because of idolatry, but after 70 years, they learned. And by the way, it was a very small portion of the people that came back to Israel. I mean, after 70 years, you got a new generation every 20 years. So we're talking about 3.5 generations, at least 3 generations. Mom and dad, probably still alive. A lot of them would live to be 60, 70, 80 years old. And their kids. But the grandkids that are now grown and they own businesses there, and I mean, they're settled in. That's their country. You're talking about Israel. That's kind of like pie in the sky, It's nothing that's going to really impress me here because I was born here and I was raised here. And so why would I want to go back to some place that Grandpa told me about? He can go back. And so there really were only a few tens of thousands, maybe I think 45,000 or something went back at one time, and another time a few. But I doubt if 1/10 of the population or even 1/15 of the population ever went back to Israel. And then from that time on, for 2.5 millennia among Orthodox Jews, they don't get into idolatry as a group. There's always individuals that may. But as a group, no. That's why they have such a hard time with the Trinity, because they think we preach 3 gods. Well, the Jewish Shema is, our God is one God. And they can't understand one God in 3 persons. Well, no, you're preaching three three gods, and it's because they learned their lesson. But it makes it real hard to convert a Jew from Judaism, the mother religion, which is the mother of Christianity. Like we said, the first churches were all Jewish. The first Christians were all Jewish.
All writers are Jews.
Yeah, all the writers are Jewish. And so it's very hard to win a Jew to Christ without them bringing up the Trinity. As you know, no, Messiah is Messiah. He's not going to be part of any Trinity or anything. And so it's very hard to lead a Jew to Christ.
Well, it's good to get them in the Old Testament, like Psalm 22 and Isaiah.
Isaiah, I knocked on a door when I was pastoring in Texas. Knocked on a door. This lady came to the door. I said, I'm Pastor Terry of I almost said Ogden Bible Baptist, of Coppell Bible Baptist. She goes, I'm a Jew, and started to shut the door. Well, see, they use that to get rid of you. Well, I'm a Jew, so you won't have anything to do with me. I said, that's wonderful. You know, we use exactly the same Old Testament you do. In fact, back in Isaiah, she said that was just a book written by a bunch of old men, and slammed the door. See, she was just using I'm a Jew to get rid of me. She wasn't no more a Jew than anybody else. If she didn't believe the Old Testament, didn't believe the prophets, thought it was just a book written by a bunch of old men, but she was using that I'm a Jew, thinking I'd go, oh. 538 BC by Cyrus marked the end of the Babylonian captivity and placed the Jews under the dominion of the Medo-Persian Empire. When Cyrus conquered Media and then began expanding his kingdom, he soon became the ruler of the then known world. When God moved upon Cyrus's heart, he became sympathetic to the Jews and issued a decree allowing them to return to their homeland and begin the rebuilding of the temple, which task they finally completed under Darius the First in 516 to 515 BC. Under King Xerxes, known in the Bible as Ahasuerus, the husband of Esther, the Jews, through the intervention of Esther and Mordecai with the king, were delivered from the plot of Haman to destroy them. And by the way, Haman was a descendant of one of the kings 400 years earlier that God said, kill the king and everybody in that country. And they didn't. They left the king and his sons alive. And 400 years later, they tried to destroy the Jews over
That's
here
Haman,
in Esther. When God says destroy them, it's because he knows the future. If you destroy them, that's not going to happen. If you don't destroy them, this is going to happen. See, God sees the future like this. He gave us free will. The future to God is not like this, one thing, because he gave mankind free will. But the future to God is like, if I make this decision, then the future is going to be affected that way for me and for everybody around me. Or if I make this decision over here, then the future is going to go in that direction. But the thing is, they all come together at the end, and God's will is going to be done. See, if it was not this way, then there's no such thing as free will. We can actually decide what God's going to do. Now, he's decided what's going to come in the end. His will is going to be done in our lives and in mankind in general. But the way we get there is what free will decides. But you know, if we decide God's way, it's going to be a lot easier on us. But if we make wrong decisions, we're still going to get where God wants us to be as human beings.
Yeah.
But it's sure going to be a rough road going around over here. And so he told them, destroy that king and all of his people. They didn't do it. And then the devil almost destroyed the Jews in captivity.
Haman.
Haman under.
Reaped what he sowed, though, because that gallows he built,
They hung him on his own
and
gallows.
all his family.
Yeah.
I showed you that God knew his family was going to be as wicked as he.
Yep. C, under Artaxerxes the first, successor to Xerxes, Ezra and Nehemiah were allowed to return to the land where Ezra the scribe was permitted to teach the law to the returned exiles, and Nehemiah organized the people to finish the reconstruction of the walls of Jerusalem, 445 to 444 BC. Page 6. D, under Ezra and Nehemiah, certain matters concerning the Feast of Tabernacles were reinstituted and a revival came about. Confession of sin and pledges were made by the people concerning separation from the Gentiles. Excuse me. In addition, a covenant was made pledging obedience by the people concerning instruction of their children, the observance of the Sabbath and the sabbatical year, and financial support of the newly rebuilt temple. Nehemiah then returned to Persia for a time.
That's Iran,
Yeah, it's Iran, modern day Iran today. One of the biggest supporters of terrorism around the whole world.
right?
As is the Palestinian, the PLO, that we support with millions of billions of dollars. If a terrorist blows somebody up, then they give the family so much money every year to support the family, and they put his name up as a big hero. And we support him. That's one thing Trump's going to try to stop.
Yeah.
Is stop all of that. In fact, maybe support of the United Nations, because they've now turned totally against Israel.
Oh, UN's against us.
Yeah,
We're the biggest supporters of it.
yeah, about a fourth to a third of their money comes from us.
We
And
should kick them right out of New York.
needs to stop. Anyway, Nehemiah then returned to Persia for a time. Upon his return to Jerusalem for his second governorship, Nehemiah chapter 13, he found the pledge broken and instituted discipline of the offenders. Under Nehemiah's second governorship, approximately 433 to 430 BC, the biblical history comes to a close and the 400 years of silence begins. Note, although the book of Malachi ends our Old Testament, Malachi actually preceded Nehemiah by several years. Therefore, chronologically speaking, the second governorship of Nehemiah actually ended the Old Testament period and began the intertestamental period. This would have set the date at right around 430 BC. The remnant carried the history of the nation. Only a remnant of the people returned to the land. The bulk of them chose to remain dispersed throughout Babylonia and Assyria, where, under the rule of the Persian Empire, they were treated more as colonists rather than as captives. It is upon this remnant returned to the land that we must concentrate, because it is they, not the bulk of the people scattered across the empire, who actually now constitute the Jewish nation. The temple and temple worship and life according to the law had been restored. They had been back in the land as a nation, a dependent nation under Persian overlordship, true, but nevertheless a nation for 140 years. Therefore, it is they upon whom the history of the nation during the period of 400 years of silence must be counted. Then comes Greece, 331 to 323 BC. Philip of Macedon succeeded in uniting the Greek city-states. Many had tried before him and had failed. Under his son Alexander, who by the way was a bisexual, under his son Alexander, the empire spread eastward, and he engaged and defeated the Persians, Greece's ancient enemy, at the Granicus River. This opened the entirety of Asia Minor to him. He then defeated the Persian armies at Issus, I believe it's Issus, and choosing to then advance to the south, he went on to conquer Phoenicia, Palestine, and Egypt. Destroying cities as he went, he advanced upon Jerusalem, which, for some reason, he spared intact. Isn't it funny how God's in control?
Yeah.
You know, the devil's in the details, but God's in control overall. And I mean, when Alexander went through, he destroyed the cities, and many times he put up an Alexandria. See, Alexandria in Egypt is not the only ancient and even modern Alexandria. Everywhere he went, when he'd conquer a country, he'd start an Alexandria named after himself. Well, when he came with destroying all of those, and he came to Jerusalem, and he didn't destroy it. He conquered Israel, but for some reason, we know why, he didn't destroy Israel. Didn't destroy Jerusalem.
What does CA mean?
CA? Approximately. It means approximately. See, there's some dates that we get from history and that they'll say, well, it was around 333 or 334 or 5, so they'll put CA, approximately 3, whatever. Then the Greek language. Alexander is written in history as a brilliant military strategist. However, his greatest contribution truly has to be the spreading of Greek culture and language across the Mediterranean world. This Hellenization was so complete that it, or at least the language, which became the language of the common people, Koine means common, and the common language is called Koine Greek, remained dominant for 600 years, from 300 BC to 300 AD, and through two empires, the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire, which followed. Because of its nuances and complexity, Greek was the perfect language for the writing of the New Testament in the 1st century AD.
That's right.
Go back to page 6. Let's read the note there. By the way, that tall rectangle there is for you to write any notes in that you want. Look at the note at the bottom there. Tradition holds that Jerusalem, now this is only tradition, so we don't know if this is true or not. Tradition holds that Jerusalem was spared only because Jaddua, the high priest, told Alexander of the prophecy of Daniel and told him that those prophecies meant that he would defeat and conquer the Persians. We have no way of knowing whether this story is true or not, but we do know that Jerusalem was spared by Alexander, while the other cities on his path of conquest were all destroyed. That was the only one he spared.
Was Jerusalem?
Jerusalem was the only city he spared. He destroyed every other city he came to. Okay, capital C, the Seleucids, the Seleucidae, and Ptolemies. During the period after the death of Alexander, the Greek Empire was divided into 4 sections. I have a movie called Alexander. I wouldn't recommend it because there's some scenes in there that are just too much nudity and things. However, it is historically accurate. And it does show the dividing into the 4 empires. It's very true to the fact that he was bisexual. He took a wife in India to try to produce a son, because without a son, then the empire was going to break up, which it did. He never had a son by her, but he also had boyfriends at the same time. So the movie's pretty good historically. But like I said, there's some nudity and things in there that I would not recommend it to anyone. The Seleucid, during the period, okay, one section was under the control of Ptolemy. Another section was under Antigonus, but he was forced eventually to surrender his portion to Seleucus. Ptolemies, Roman numeral 4, 323 to 198 BC. Egypt, as well as the Jewish nation, were under the control of Ptolemy, which put the Jews under Egyptian rule. Ptolemy Soter dealt harshly with the Jews, but finally became friendly to them, and they prospered under the Ptolemaic occupation. It was during this period that the Hellenization of the Jews was made complete. In other words, the Greekicizing. They started speaking the Greek language, and they started adopting Greek customs. Now, they would do that 6 days a week, but on Saturday, which is the Sabbath, they would no longer go to what was called the gymnasium, but it's not like our gymnasium where you just exercise. The gymnasiums back then were places where they learned philosophy. It was a school, as well as a place. They wanted to keep you fit, body, soul, and spirit. So the Jew would go, the kids would go to the Greek gymnasium to study, but then on the Sabbath, they went to the local synagogue. And that's where they would then learn Hebrew. So the Hellenized Jews were they were bilingual. They spoke and did business and things in the Greek language, but they also spoke the Jewish language, because at a bar mitzvah for the boys, or a bat mitzvah for the girls, they were required to quote the first 5 books of the Bible.
Moses.
Yeah, they had to quote the books of Moses. That's what they called them. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They had to memorize those and quote them.
Were these Jews in Egypt then?
Everywhere throughout that. At that time, when the Greek Empire split into the 4, Ptolemy had control of Israel and all of Egypt. And so the Jews there, they were the ones that were under control of Egypt, because Ptolemy was in control of Egypt. And I would assume that he probably lived there and controlled the empire from there.
They believe a lot of the Jews built those pyramids. They used them as slaves.
Actually, the pyramids existed before the Jews came to. Yeah,
So
the
that
pyramids
is-
were already there when the Jews built treasure cities. But the pyramids predated the Jews by centuries.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
that's a common belief that the Jews built the pyramids, but no,
Yeah.
they were there for centuries before the Jews were ever taken captive into Egypt. And
That's good to know.
yeah, as I said, they built treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses and things like that.
They still were slaves, yeah.
They were slaves, yeah, and harshly treated. Hellenization of the Jews was made complete. It is believed by many that it was during this period that the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, was completed for use by the Hellenistic Jews. Seleucids, Roman numeral 5, Seleucids, 198 to 166 BC. Constant conflict ensued between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, and eventual victory by the Seleucids was won after a war that lasted from 202 BC until 198 BC. At the Battle of Panion, the Seleucids prevailed and, as a result, gained control of Palestine. Under these conquerors, the Jews were severely persecuted because they would not yield to pressure to become more Greek and join in the pagan rites practiced by the Seleucids. This was a far cry from the benevolent rule of the Ptolemies and caused much resentment among the Jewish people against their new rulers. B. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, son of Antiochus III, attempted to invade Egypt, which belonged to the Ptolemies, and was prevented from doing so by the Romans. He took out his rage upon the Jews of Jerusalem, killing many and preventing the rest from observing their religious rites. He then desecrated the temple by offering a pig as a blood sacrifice upon a pagan altar which he built within the sacred precincts of the temple.
Wow.
C. During this time, one of the most influential cities of the Christian era to come, began to gain prominence in Syria, Antioch. In Syria, and it's Antioch. As the capital of the Seleucid Empire, it grew in prominence and size until by the time of Jesus, it was the third largest city in the Roman Empire. It was the first major city of the spread of the gospel and the growth of Christ's church in the New Testament era, as well as Paul's home church and home base for his missionary journeys. It was at Antioch that the believers were first called Christians. So you can see how God's in control of all this. You know, through all these various empires and destroying cities and destruction in that, he preserved Jerusalem, the holy city, and then he made Antioch the third largest city and one of the most prominent cities in the Roman Empire, because he knew that's where Paul was going to headquarter, and that was then going to spread the gospel of Messiah, Jesus Christ. Roman numeral 6, Maccabean Hasmonean period, 166 to 63 BC. The Maccabean era, 166 to 135. Subsequent to Antiochus IV Epiphanes' intolerable pollution of the temple, the persecution of the Jews was intensified and until it reached a pinnacle of offense when a priest named Mattathias refused to offer a pagan sacrifice at Modin when ordered to do so by a Syrian official. He then killed an apostate Jew who offered to do so, as well as the official envoy, and then fled into the wilderness with his 2 sons. He immediately became the vortex around which a major rebellion formed. Zealots from all over soon joined the group and the rebellion spread. Although Mattathias died shortly thereafter, he had sparked an ever-widening rebellion that would grow until finally they would succeed in throwing off the Syrian yoke. Upon Mattathias' death, which was at the very beginning of the rebellion, the leadership of the group fell upon a man named Judas, who was called Maccabeus, which means the hammer. The Maccabees, as the group came to be known, eventually defeated the Syrian army and Jerusalem was liberated. The Jewish feast of Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights, is kept as a memorial to that liberation. So now you know what they're celebrating with Hanukkah at this time of year. During this time, both Jews and Syrians became more and more corrupt, and through political intrigue, a man named Jonathan became both the ruling high priest as well as a member of the Syrian royalty. His brother Simon signed a treaty with Rome, 139 BC, and gained political freedom for the Jews, as well as recognition for his own family as the official priestly family from whom the high priest was chosen. This then legitimized the new high priest dynasty of the Hasmoneans. All political power of Judea was now centered in the priests, who became the civil religious leaders of the country. Gaining in wealth and power, these men ruled the country, while the true royal family, that of David, diminished to obscurity. Joseph, the carpenter, was an example of this. Rather than ruling a country and working with men, He used a rule on wood and worked wood with his hands. He should have been part of the ruling body, but he wasn't because of that political intrigue and then the striking up in
This is
relationship with Rome.
Is this the stepfather?
That's the stepfather of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually of the Davidic line. He
Yeah.
should have been a ruler in the civil and religious government. Instead, I put down he was using a rule on wood instead of a rule on people. The death of Simon, the last surviving son of Mattathias, marked the end of the Maccabean era. The Hasmonean era, 135 to 63 BC. For the next 100 years, the Jews would experience political freedom. That freedom, however, was rift with corruption, jealousy, greed, and suspicion among the royal family. Since they were the civil religious leaders, then the corruption reached into both the civil and the religious realms. In other words, into every part of society. The failure of the Hasmoneans to properly rule eventually led to a Roman takeover of the country. A. The reign of John Hyrcanus. During this reign, two political and religious parties emerged. The Hasidim, representing the conservatives who wanted to retain Jewish religion and liberty and were against the Hellenization of the Jews, and the Hellenizers, who wanted to embrace certain ways of Greek life and were willing to surrender some of their Jewish ways and liberties to gain them. From the Hasidim sprang the Pharisees, and from the Hellenizers sprang the Sadducees. The strife was sharp between the two sects, and the seat of power shifted back and forth. At one point, the Pharisees even asked the Syrians to help in overthrowing the Sadducees, and then later enlisted the Sadducees to help in ousting the Syrians. So, see, they were working both sides of the street. We're on page 9 in the New Testament.
Thank you.
Later, a Sadducee by the name of Alexander, whom the Pharisees had originally ousted with the help of the Syrians, remained bitter over the incident and crucified 800 of the Pharisees at a victory banquet. Mm-hmm. See, we think that the way we read the Bible, the emphasis is on Christ. But really, if you understand the Sadducees and the Pharisees, they were killing each other. I mean, he sacrificed 800 of them at one time. By the time of Jesus, the Sadducees had almost disappeared because the Pharisees were killing them.
Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection.
Now that's why they were sad, you see.
Sadducees.
Yeah.
Good name for them.
It is. This constant bitter and bloody strife continued with attacks and retaliations until finally the Romans had to step in, and thus began the Roman rule over Judea. B. The prelude to Roman rule. The final ruler, Hyrcanus II, favored the Pharisees, and because of that favor, the Pharisees succeeded in having many of the Sadducees put to death in vengeance for the earlier crucifixion of 800 of their number by Alexander. When Hyrcanus II discovered that his own brother, Aristobulus II, was conspiring with the Sadducees to have him removed, he fled the country and found refuge with the Nabatean Arabs. And Roman number 7, Roman rule. Say that real fast. Roman number 7, Roman rule began in 663 to 4 BC. Of Hyrcanus II, starting when the latter was in exile. He maintained to Hyrcanus that he had been treated unjustly and that he should be restored to his place as high priest. To do this, Antipater suggested that the Nabatean Arab army be used to launch an attack against Jerusalem to restore Hyrcanus to power. B. Rome. Once Rome heard of this political unrest and threat of war, it decided to intervene. Choosing Hyrcanus II over his brother Aristobulus II, Rome deposed Aristobulus and restored Hyrcanus to his priestly office. Through this restoration of Hyrcanus, Antipater became deeply involved in Jewish matters, and his family's influence, and one might say stranglehold, on that nation continued for 4 generations. Antipater became chief counselor and the power behind the throne. At this time, 63 BC, Pompey the Great made Judea a Roman province with 3 districts: Judea, Galilee, and Perea. During these campaigns, Pompey the Great, Ignatius Pompeius Magnus, I guess that's his true name, occupied the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the Second Temple, which had been the center of Jewish religious life for 5 centuries. In the later Roman Civil War, Hyrcanus and Antipater forsook their allegiance to Pompey, who had helped put them in power in the first place, and threw their allegiance to Octavius, who later became Emperor Augustus. This maneuvering by Hyrcanus and Antipater was later rewarded when Antipater's son, Herod, called Herod the Great, was declared and physically made king of the Jews under the Roman Empire's overlordship. C. Antigonus, the son of Aristobulus II, Antigonus effected a recapture of Jerusalem by conspiring with the Parthians and had himself declared both king and priest. D. The Herodian dynasty. And we're almost out of time. Antipater, although never declared king, he still was the holder of power and established a dynasty, some pronounce it dynasty, take your pick, as we saw in an earlier segment that would last for 4 generations. Herod the Great and his son Herod Antipas. Herod the Great was the son of Antipater. Herod the Great, the son of Antipater, was forced to flee to Rome upon the ascendance of Antigonus to the throne. There he became a friend of Mark Antony, who gave him the title King of the Jews, and threw the might of Rome behind Herod's quest to be restored to the throne of Judea. The defeat of the Parthians and Antigonus, and the placing of Herod as the king in Antigonus' place, truly marked the beginning of Roman rule in Judea. It also solidified the Herodian family's place as the political rulers of Judea under Rome. The establishment of the Herodian dynasty also marked the end of the Hasmonean priesthood's stranglehold on civil power that had lasted for 100 years. Finally ensconced in power with the might of Rome to defend his kingship, Herod the Great reigned from 37 to 4 BC, and his son Herod Antipas carried the dynasty into the time of John the Baptist and Messiah Jesus Christ. And by the way, that's how we know Jesus Christ was not born in the year 0.
Yeah, this doesn't make sense though, 4 BC.
Yeah, they had to adjust it because we know from history that's when Herod died. And therefore Jesus had to have been born.
Well, Herod Antipas was the guy that wanted to kill
all the babies
2
Yeah.
years and under.
Yeah, so we know Jesus was actually born somewhere around 4 BC. And which, like you said, is really kind of a non sequitur.
Yeah.
Okay, although appointed by Rome, Herod the Great was no mere puppet of the Romans. A strong and shrewd ruler, Herod eliminated all rivals and was able to manipulate those of Rome who thought to manipulate him. And by the way, that's also why he ordered all of the children 2 years and under to be killed, is because the wise men never came to the manger. They were never there. That's just Catholicism and people history and, people practice. No, it says they came to the house where the babe was. And that's why Herod said, kill all the kids from 2 years and under. See, when I first read that years and years ago, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Why not just kill the babies? Well, it's because Jesus wasn't just a newborn baby anymore. By the time the wise men saw the star and followed it, and they came and they talked to Herod, and he talked to the priests, and they said, well, Bethlehem. Well, he knew Jesus was going to be a year old, or maybe, probably not 2 years old, but probably a year old. So he said, just kill them all up to 2 years old. You realize back then those towns were so small, there were probably only 40 or 50 or 60 children killed. I mean, it was not like thousands. We always, from the movies, we think, oh, he slaughtered thousands. No, he may have killed 100 or maybe less, or 30 or 40 or 50. But those were not big towns. I mean, they were pretty small. And so that's how we know that the wise men, that Jesus was born at least in 4 BC, maybe a year before that even. Okay.
But didn't he divide time like everything after him is AD?
No, that was later divided when our calendar was devised by a Catholic monk. Catholic monks started our calendar.
Wow.
The Jews still don't use our calendar. According to the Jews, this is like the year 4000 or something.
Well, 360 is a year per Jew, 360 days according to.
Yeah, they go by a lunar,
Revelation 11.
they go by a lunar calendar. 28 days, that's why every so many years they have to add one extra month to their calendar to get everything back so that summer and winter and that they all jive again. Okay, page 11, we gotta stop. We're out of time. And we almost made it through that section. So finish that section and then Brother Mullins will be back next week. Any questions?
You want to answer the questions, right?
Hmm?
Answer the question.
And answer the questions in there, please.